Hey survivors, it's Angie Atkinson, and today at QueenBeing.com, I'm going to give you a guide to EMDR healing. All right, so let's get started. My name is Angie Atkinson, and this channel is all about teaching you what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. So there are a lot of different types of treatment that you can use to get through different traumas. Different kinds of therapies, different kinds of techniques, different kinds of things that you can do, okay? It's really important that if you've experienced any type of trauma, that you seek treatment, okay? And with the right treatment, the fact is that you can find healing. Now, this is especially true for those of us who have been through narcissistic abuse, okay? One of the emerging popular forms of treatment that we can use is EMDR therapy, all right? It's a practice that was once used primarily for people who struggled with problems related to post-traumatic stress disorder. You see what I'm saying? So the fact is that nowadays EMDR is successfully used for anyone who suffers from the effects of any type of traumatic treatment. And this includes from anywhere from an abusive marriage, toxic relationship, toxic parent, all the way out to an assault or an accident or anything in between, okay? So there are a lot of different ways that you can use EMDR, not just for narcissistic abuse recovery, all right? So let's define EMDR. What is it exactly? Well, the initials for EMDR stand for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's a type of psychotherapy treatment. And its purpose is one that is intended to relieve stress and other negative kinds of feelings that we find ourselves going through during traumatic memories, okay? Traumatic times, PTSD, CPTSD, etc., okay? So this can be living through a traumatic event yourself, such as a toxic relationship or series of events, or witnessing it happening to another person. Okay, so let's say if your mother was abused by your father in childhood and you watched it happen, you could be traumatized by that as well, just as much as she could, if that makes any sense. All right, there are 3 different parts to EMDR therapy that can be useful to people who are in our situation, who are recovering from narcissistic abuse, okay? So the first part of that is dealing with the events and the memories that are associated with and responsible for the emotional problems that you've been experiencing, all right? So in the first part of dealing with these events, you're going to learn how to create new links that you can associate with those events and memories. Does that make sense? So EMDR therapy works in that you can feel safe and in control of your environment rather than feeling afraid and feeling like the world is just not a safe place for you to be in. Does that make sense? The second part that can help people who use EMDR techniques is targeting the present situation that might provoke your distress. Okay, so your triggers. So during these sessions, while you would be going through the phases, you would be doing work designed to desensitize any external or internal triggers that you might have. Does that make sense? So a lot of people have certain triggers that will cause them to feel as powerless and scared as they were when at the time that the actual event took place. So like you could be 10 years out of the relationship and still be triggered by something that happened at that time. Well, if that happens to you, you feel like you're scared because you're actually back in the event or re-experiencing it. You're re-traumatized by it, if that makes any sense. Okay? EMDR, though, it can help you to overcome the emotions and the issues that are connected with that. Okay? So the third part then involves using imagery. And imagery consists of picturing possible future events that could help you to obtain the skills necessary for reconstructing how you want to react to situations. So visualization, imagery, see what I'm saying? EMDR therapy then helps you learn how to cope with a trigger that brings up old emotions. See what I'm saying? So, for example, if you were the victim of a fire in your home and you feel the heat from any kind of flame on your skin, you are going to be afraid. And you might find yourself freaking out just like it was the fire again that you'd just experienced. EMDR therapy, though, it can teach you how to cope with the feeling of terror that you get when you have those triggers. And then it can help you to refocus it, reprocess it. And this way you won't feel terror next time you feel heat. You understand what I'm saying? From a fire. So working through triggers is a big part of healing with the use of EMDR therapy, which I think is incredibly useful for narcissistic abuse survivors. You know what I'm saying? So it involves healing with the past, with the present, and also with the future. This part of EMDR can actually help you so that the problems you're experiencing won't always be with you. It's kind of a good thing, right? So if you have several triggers, you make sure to mention them all to your therapist or your coach that you're working with on EMDR therapy. Okay? It's important that you learn to work through each one, because this way they don't bring on the painful or terrorizing emotions anymore. Okay? So when you're in an EMDR session, then the therapist will lead you in various sets of eye movements. Okay? During the session of eye movements, what you'll be doing is focusing on a traumatic event. So instead of using EMDR to move away from the trauma, you're actually going to use it in this case to move toward it in order to fix it. Okay? So at the same time, you're also going to be focusing on any emotional problems or thoughts that are associated with the event. Okay? This back and forth eye movement is going to help you to learn to alter your responses to memories or triggers or whatever associated with whatever it was that you went through. Okay? So while the same techniques are used, there can be slight variations depending on what you're getting treated for. So some therapists are going to use music during EMDR therapy sessions because maybe that works for you, and others will choose not to. The reason that we use music is because music is another way to stimulate your senses and help guide you to being able to alter your perceptions. Does that make sense? So when you do that, you can change your responses and therefore change the outcomes. All right. So other therapists are going to teach you certain body movements, like having you drum your fingers or tap your toes, because these movements work to stimulate your senses. If you've lived through several traumatic events, the therapist will target each one of them separately to work through them. And the reason I think that this works partially is because it gets you right back into this moment. It takes you away from wherever you've gone in your head, and it gets you right back into this moment. It's kind of a beautiful thing. So by focusing on helping you with one at a time, you won't feel overwhelmed with emotion. You won't receive a trigger overload. The therapist will then help you to work through the remaining traumas. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when anyone experiences a trauma, it can cause several different emotional responses. So what EMDR does then is it helps you to process the events in a healthier way so that you aren't triggered by the negativity. You see what I'm saying? So by processing the things, you're going to gain a better way to deal with the negative emotions as they come up. Now, EMDR therapy doesn't use the homework and other techniques used by other therapies. Okay, the purpose behind EMDR techniques is to help you leave the sessions feeling empowered by the traumatic events rather than terrified or unable to face them. Does that make sense? So the length of the sessions and the treatment plan then will differ because different clients will have different emotional responses to different events. Does that make sense? I gotta stay saying that. Okay. What problem can be helped by EMDR? A whole bunch, I'm gonna tell you. So in addition to straight up narcissistic abuse recovery, there are several other problems and symptoms that can be handled. And so some of those are still within narcissistic abuse recovery. Extremely traumatic events such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, all of these things can definitely be successfully treated in the proper setting with EMDR therapy. It's proven. Rape victims have found relief from the traumatic memories through techniques that EMDR offers. The childhood traumas can also be treated by using EMDR. Experiencing the death of a loved one, EMDR. Not everybody grieves the same way. Losing someone you care about, could be a traumatic event that could cause people to become stuck. I've seen it happen more times than I'd care to say. EMDR can also help you overcome the trauma of having lost someone that you love. There are other traumatic events that can require the need for a treatment like EMDR. So if you witness a terrible trauma, or the abuse of someone else, it can really affect you emotionally. So just like going through a natural disaster, or like even watching it unfold on television, or like the 9/11 thing when that happened all those years ago, it wasn't that many years ago, people were traumatized. I was traumatized, and I live in St. Louis. I wasn't anywhere near New York that day. Now, to be fair, several members of my family were flying in planes that day, but that's a whole other story. Don't you remember where you were on September 11th, 2001, if you were alive back then? Going through a short-term event can have long-term emotional, consequences. An example of this, like I said, a house fire, or maybe being in a car accident. All right. When you go through something like that, these events can bring on feelings of loss of control, fear. In some cases, if you experience a trauma that leads to the death of someone else, you'll develop survivor's guilt. Even if you didn't directly cause the death, if you just escaped maybe. Okay, here's an example. My husband's mother, when she was a teenager, was supposed to go with some friends out into a car and do some things out for the evening or whatever. Well, she wasn't allowed to go. She hadn't done her homework or something, and her parents made her stay home. And because of that, she survived. Because that night, all of those teenagers passed away. They were in a car accident. And so she, for years, felt terrible about that, felt so much survivor's guilt about that, because she was supposed to be in the car. But I'm telling you right now, I know she was supposed to be here with us, because she was a huge, huge influence in my own life. So, and she was wonderful to her children, who she would have never had in her life without having survived that accident. So, interesting. Anyway, these feelings that you get from this can be worked through with EMDR. Emotional issues like depression, anxiety, overwhelming fears, phobias, and low self-esteem, EMDR treats them. It can. The problems that you have don't have to be extreme to use EMDR, and you can seek it out if you're dealing with problems like a bad temper or excessive worrying. You can find help for working through relationship problems. I use EMDR with my clients sometimes, because the thing is, you can also learn how to overcome things like test anxiety, panic attacks, etc. If you feel like you've got something that's holding you back in your personal or professional life, you can contact a coach or a therapist and have them help you work through it. With these things in place, you might feel a lack of motivation or have a fear of being alone. EMDR can help you deal with those issues. It's a beautiful thing. Many people say that EMDR has been successful in helping them deal with the underlying issues that can lead to eating disorders even. How about that? Eating disorders are literally life-threatening. And so, I have one client right now who's struggling with a potential eating disorder, and it's very difficult. She is getting therapy outside of my coaching, don't worry. But part of what makes EMDR so effective for people suffering from eating disorders or suffering from, toxic relationships, toxic relationship recovery, all of this stuff, abuse, etc., is the fact that, and it's the way that EMDR explores positivity versus negativity, okay? During EMDR treatment, you're going to learn to reframe stuff, look at yourself in a different light. So let's talk about the phases of EMDR therapy, all right? So it focuses on treatment through the use of phases, and these phases that EMDR focuses on are the past, the present, and the future. The overall treatment plan has a total of 8 phases, all right? Each one of those is uniquely designed to help you to work through the problems and the symptoms that you're dealing with. In the first phase, you're going to learn how to deal with what involves your past. So you're going to meet with your therapist or your coach, and you're going to have an in-depth discussion about your problem and what caused the problem to occur. If you don't know, your coach or your therapist can help you figure that out to determine if you're ready for EMDR and what is your best possible program or plan to work with this person. Everybody's a little different. Everybody needs a little bit of different help. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of the focus during the first phase is on any troubling and frightening memories that you might have. So, and also on any present situations that are triggering these memories. Does that make sense? So the age that you were when the trauma took place was also taken into account. You know, they say sometimes, even when it comes to like people who become pregnant as teenagers and they choose to raise their children, sometimes people say that sometimes when they're not healthy in certain ways, they have a tendency, moms who have babies early, dads who have babies early and have to become adults very fast, they have a tendency to stop maturing on certain levels, and they maintain like a 15-year-old mentality or a 17-year-old mentality. And I've seen the same thing happen with people who have big traumas or horrible life changes during their teen years. The same thing happens, and as they become adults, they tend to stay stuck. So that is something to consider as well. And it's not every case. Don't be sending me negative comments talking about I had my baby when I was 13 and I'm fine, because I'm sure you're fine. But some people aren't fine after they go through this. And these are the people that I'm talking about right now. All right? Anyway, if you're a victim of an adult trauma rather than a childhood trauma, so let's say you were not abused as a child, but you've been abused as an adult, like say by a narcissist, well, your treatment plan might be slightly different. Okay, if you're a victim of multiple traumas instead of just one, then it might take longer. Obviously, you're going to have to work through each thing. So for the second phase of EMDR treatment, your therapist will teach you different techniques that will help you deal with stress, and that will also help with focusing on how to handle external and internal triggers. All right. So these techniques are then used in further sessions, and then you can use them in between sessions anytime you need to. It's really, really helpful in healing from narcissistic abuse. The third phase then takes you to dealing with assessing and reprocessing these memories. So part of the assessment involves your coach or your therapist asking you to verbalize, tell me how you feel about those events. You might also be asked to explain how your body reacts to the triggers and the both internal and external triggers. Okay. So the fourth phase that you're going to go through then is desensitization. Okay, so during this phase, the therapist is going to focus on disturbing sensations or emotions that will have internal and external effects. Okay, the sensations that come along with feeling triggered, things like this. And you're going to be asked to rate how you feel about current situations and past traumatic events. And generally on a scale of 1 to 10. All right. And this is also called the subjective unit of distress scales, or SUDS, which I find cute kind of, but whatever. Anyway, during this phase, your coach or your therapist will teach you how to use eye movements that have changes in focus and shifts until you can positively lower your rating from 10 to 1 or 0. Make sense? So the fifth phase then works to help you replace the negative beliefs that you have about yourself with positive ones. And this is like my favorite part. This is why I tell you all the time, think of 10 things you're grateful for and 3 things you love about yourself, because I'm trying to sneak a little bit of EMDR in there, because the fact is, because of the desensitization that you experienced during the narcissistic abuse, and because of the way that you were taught to perceive yourself during that time, you're not who you really are supposed to be. You see what I'm saying? And so you aren't able to look at the traumatic event the way you should until you go through something like this, where you can kind of reframe it and learn to see it from a new point of view and therefore change your life. So let's just give you an example. All right. If the traumatic event happened to you when you were a child, you're going to be able to look at it from the perspective of a strong adult instead of the helpless child that you used to be. It's a beautiful thing. And after the positive beliefs have been instilled in your head, and they're really in there, right? The sixth phase that you're going to have is, you're going to have to revisit the traumatic event again. which I know it sucks, but you're going to be asked to determine whether your body now has any tension or residual negative feelings that are associated with that stuff, with those events, with that part of your life. And if you do, then of course you're going to need to go through a little more EMDR therapy. But if you don't, you can move on to the next phase, and that's the 7th phase, which brings you to closure. This is something you don't get from a narcissist naturally. You have to create it yourself. So, and it will take place over a few different sessions, depending on how much you need. It might take 1 or 2 sessions. It might take 5 or 6 sessions. It might take 10. It depends on what you need and how quickly you want to reprocess. All right. Your therapist or your life coach might teach you more techniques, especially those that deal with ways that can, you can self-heal. That's how I roll. I'm like, let me teach you how to do it yourself, because I think that's the most effective way you can be. If you need to talk to me every time you need to self-calm, it's not going to work, is it? So during this phase, what I do is I'll try to help you remember, that you're in control in and out of our sessions, because the sessions that you have with me are just absolutely all about you, of course. So you might be asked to keep a journal during this time, depending on your treatment plan and depending on what you and your coach or your therapist have worked out. So the 8th and the final phase then is reevaluation. And this is where your therapist will ask you at the beginning of each session, or your coach will ask you at the beginning of each session, hey, what residual feelings do you have about the traumatic event? What residual feelings do you have about your narcissist? What's going on in your head right now? Rate your feelings. Let's talk about it. And because at this point, I want to point something out really quickly. It's really important that you're honest about how you rate your feelings and what you say about your feelings, because if the rating starts to go up again, you need to make sure that you continue in the therapy or the coaching. You should leave your sessions feeling better than you did when you walked in. Does that make any sense to you? It makes sense to me. All right, in our next video, we're going to go into how EMDR works, okay? So stay tuned for that. Until then, if there's any questions, comments, concerns, things you want to talk about, hit me up. We'll have a discussion. And in my next video, I'll go deeper into EMDR and explain it to you a little bit more. All right? I'm going to close up for now. Have a wonderful day. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean so much to me. I'll see you soon. Oh, one more thing. How's this camera look? I'm trying a new camera. I'm hoping it looks better. Not a webcam. Yay! Okay? Let me know your thoughts. I'll see you soon, guys. Thanks again. Have a great day. It's my mission to teach others what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. Take care of your body. Take care of your soul. Nurture the real you and introduce him or her to the world. Be comfortable in your own skin and in your place in this world. Take your spot. Take it now. And the universe will take its cue from you. You feel me? If so, subscribe to my channel. Let's get it done together.